Today I want to talk a little bit about Polyiso. Hello Chicago, my name is Jim Copenhaver. I'm the owner of Anchor Point Roofing. Today I want to talk a little bit about Polyiso, specifically rooftop insulation when it pertains to a flat roof or a low slope roof, we like to call it. Me and the guys call it Polyiso. The proper name is Polyiso cyanurate. It's installed on a flat roof surface and then membranes go over it. It provides something called R value. For instance, like a Chicago wall, an exterior wall, is typically an R19. The R value is the thermal resistance, so it just gives you insulation. R19 in a Chicago wall. This, I just happen to know, is 2 layers of 2.6 Polyiso. This is going to total about an R30. So it just gives you a reference as to what we're thinking and what we're talking about. There's different thicknesses of Polyiso. I actually got some out of the shop. This thickness here is 1.5 inches. But as you can see, there's lots of different sizes. 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch, 2.6. This 1.5 inch piece right here has a thermal resistance or an R value of 9.3. So it's going to give you some rooftop insulation. It makes things actually a little bit quieter, a lot of our customers report, and definitely makes it a little cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. So you can see the different sizes, the different R values, and kind of what they look like. So, according to the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, if it's a new building, architects, inspectors, they want to see what's called an R30 of continuous insulation on rooftops. And they want the Polyiso to meet energy specific standards. So in the previous chart, we had a layer, we had the 2.6 Polyiso. That is like around an R15 or 16. And what they want to see is the R30. So what you've got to do on a new building, or when it's possible, you want to bring it up to code, which we require 5.2 inches of Polyiso. It's going to be 2 layers of 2.6, and that brings you up to the current code. This really applies for new construction, and when you can get it on there, you want to try to put the full 5.2. Here's a roof that we did. I think we did this last year. You can see we've got 2 layers of 2.6, so we brought it up to a full R30. I love seeing this old wood when it's been scraped down and all cleaned up. We've got the first layer here, and you can see we've got the second layer here. We secure it with 3-inch plates, and then it needs to go 1 inch through the old wood to make sure it's really secured well. So 2 layers make up to get you to code. Here's just an example. We stagger the joints, and I want to go back to the R value just a little bit. So there's something called thermal bridging. If you lined these up, these are 4x8 sheets like a piece of plywood. If you lined these seams up where the second layer was on there, it would allow for some thermal bridging. If you can imagine the 2 seams right together, for instance like this, you've got 2 pieces of 1.5 inches that come together. Okay, some thermal bridging could happen right here in the middle. You don't want the seams lined up because then you can get warm air through here and it can cause some problems. When that warm air is able to escape and get up and hit the membrane, you imagine a foot or a 14-inch snow on that Chicago rooftop, and then you've got that warm air that's able to sneak through and hit that frozen rooftop on top. You can get condensation in there. It's rare when you have this kind of roof, but you want to make sure you've gotten rid of all the thermal bridging that you can. But what we do is we take the third piece and we stagger it. So you've got seams here. You want to stagger that seam so this piece is here. We stagger the seams so that they're offset. But wait, not all times can the full 5.2 inches be installed. You want to get as much as you can on there, but there's instances, especially in older buildings, like I said earlier, a new building, you want to have the 5.2, it's code, you're going to be inspected. Let's make sure that's done right. But not all older buildings are going to allow for that 5.2 inches. And I'll explain why. The City of Chicago and the IBC codes say you don't have to have the 5.2. They want you to, but imagine this is it. So in Chicago, we have what we call a lot of dog houses. It's a 3 flat, you walk all the way up, and there's a pop-up, part out of your roof where you can walk out. People build roof decks, things like that. We see this a lot on dog houses specifically. We see it on copings, we see it on skylights, but this seemed like a good example. Imagine you come up and this is your doghouse leading onto your doghouse door leading onto your rooftop. What's going to happen when you've got a threshold there and the city says, okay, you've got to put 5.2 inches of polyiso on. This is not exactly to the exact specs, but it's about close. So you're going to put 5.2 inches on this, and obviously the polyiso on the roof is now going to be 2 or 3 inches higher than even your threshold. So the city says, okay, we understand. We're not going to make you retrofit your door and move it up 8 inches and rebuild things. This could happen with skylights. It could happen with parapet walls. It can happen with doors and thresholds. So the city and the code understands this. They understand you're not going to always be able to get 5.2. And what they say is, we're not going to make you retrofit your building to bring this up to code. Here's another instance. So this coping, which really shouldn't have been installed in this manner, it needed a gravel stop, a video for another day. Imagine putting 5.2. So this membrane here, we know it didn't have any insulation on it whatsoever. So it needs a replacement. You can see the cracking and alligatoring. So you take this off, you take the coping, and now you're going to put 5.2 inches of polyiso on there. It's going to bring you up higher than the outside of the parapet wall. So this is again another instance where the city and the code says, get as much as you can on there. This is going to lift it up. So to do it, if you said we're going to get the 5.2, you've got to rebuild the entire parapet wall and raise it up probably 10 inches to accommodate the 5.2. So you can't always get it on there in every situation. Here's a skylight. Look at this one, for example. So this is probably the 8 inches. One of the things that you need to find a balance between is your coping. So you want at least 8 inches from any skylight, coping, parapet wall, down to the membrane. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. What do we do when this comes up? Do we have to move doors, rebuild parapet walls to accommodate today's energy code? What is a homeowner to do? So they're basically going to say, get as much as you can on there. The code says, allow the R503.1, it allows for accommodation of existing constraints, parapet heights, equipment curbs, skylights, curbs, window seals, door thresholds, this was my example, and other such elements with flashing into the roof system that are not required to be increased to solely provide the adequate height for your insulation. So they understand this. You've got a 5,000 square foot building. They're not going to make you rebuild half of it just so you can meet today's energy codes. My interpretation of the code is kind of the same thing. And it says, in no case shall less polyiso be installed. So install as much this is my dumbed down version. Install as much polyiso insulation as practically feasible without requiring structural retrofitting of the existing building. So this is my interpretation of the code. I urge you to go online and read it yourself if you so decide. Under no circumstances should the new roof system contain less insulation that was previously in place. So get as much as you can on there. It should not be less, and the city and the code enforcers are going to understand. Here's what I mentioned a little bit earlier. We need to find a balance between the NRC best practice recommendation. So what this 8 inches is, I was showing you the skylight earlier. You want to have from the flat, we call it the field, the flat roof membrane to a skylight or coping or a door threshold. You want to have a minimum of 8 inches between there. So let's say this is the roof. You want to have at least 8 inches. And you can imagine in Chicago, we haven't had it in a few years, but 10 inches, a foot, 14 inches of snow sitting on your rooftop. And now you've got it over the skylight or over the coping. And you've got that water and snow and ice melting on there. So National Roofing Contractors Association wants to see a minimum of 8 inches between the finished roof membrane and the counter flashing, termination bar, skylight, thresholds, etc. So what you want to do is, there are instances where you know, let's say there was a 1/2 inch, most old roofs we find no insulation. There are instances where you can get 1 inch or 2 inches or even 3 inches of polyiso on there, and still, so you've gotten as much as you can on there, but you still keep the 8-inch threshold in mind, the 8-inch minimum. 8 inches, again, is a minimum. We like to go at least 12 or 18 inches because of what I talked about. You've got that snow sitting there. An 8-inch, 12-inch snow is going to sit against your termination bar and counter flashing, and eventually it could cause problems. 8-inch minimum also applies to wall copings around the parapet. So if you've got a parapet wall only that tall, which we see a lot, and you bring it up 5 inches, you want to make sure you have the minimum of 8 inches. Typical, again, we usually shoot for 12 to 18 inches of wall flashing when it's possible. And here's kind of my last example. We got Paul marking it up, showing the repairs that need to be made. But even in this one, if you could imagine, here's the field. 5 inches might come up to here, and you're just in that 8-inch threshold. You would be close. I obviously don't have a tape measure on this, but this is just my last example of what happens. So polyiso, get as much as you can on there. That's what the city's going to say. If you can fully bring it up to code with the 5.2 inches, it's going to change the dynamics of your building. It's going to make it so much warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. You want to prevent the thermal bridging that we talked about by staggering the joints. And that's it, Chicago. Thank you so much for watching.